So I want us to do something really interesting. I want us to rate Rishi Sunak on his 5 pledges.
Okay.
For those who forgot, when Rishi Sunak took over from Liz Truss, do you remember Liz Truss?
Yeah, she was there for like 5 minutes, innit? 31 days
I
or
can't wait for
something.
those pub quizzes where they'll be like, who's the shortest ever prime? You'll be like, Liz Truss. But anyway, so when he took over from Liz Truss, of course, he was inheriting a manifesto that Boris Johnson campaigned on, a post-Brexit manifesto aimed at leveling up Britain. But of course, Rishi Sunak devised his own 5 pledges. He says, I want you guys to judge me by these 5 pledges.
Yep.
And, he said, if you're going to vote for me, judge me on this. Now, we've got an election, probably going to be in May, maybe in October. There's conversations about November as well. So I just thought people should know what the 5 pledges are, and then they can make their decision as to whether he's actually achieved things or not. So the 5 pledges he had, one was to halve inflation. The second was to grow the economy. The third one rather, was to get debt falling. Number 4 was to cut NHS waiting lists. And number 5, this is the one everyone knows. People watching me even have a tattoo on their shoulder. Stop the boats. We've heard it a million times.
Yeah.
Stop the boats. Stop the boats. So let's just, firstly, do you think it was foolish for him to set these 5 pledges?
Well, not necessarily, because those seem to be the most pressing issues. Obviously, with the stopping the boats, immigration is quite a big issue. In fact, some people would argue that stopping the so-called small boats is an indication of how not fit for purpose the immigration system has become, in some people's opinions. Then we look at other things, so for example, halving inflation and reducing debt, especially after COVID, where we essentially borrowed our way out of trouble.
Yeah.
So these are things that I would say it's wise for him to do, but can he actually do it is the question. And
the difficulty is making it a pledge, because it reminds me of Ed Miliband. Political nerds may remember that famous tombstone that he created, where he actually wrote his pledges into the tombstone. And I guess in politics, once you make a clear, very measurable commitment, then people are going to judge you based on that, right? So that's where sometimes I kind of wonder, could he have made maybe one big pledge that he knew he could deliver on, and then say, these are things I'm aiming to do, rather than...
Yeah, but is that enough? Because with modern day politics, people want to be promised something and then be delivered on that promise. Saying things like, oh, well, I'm going to aim to do it, but I might not do it. That doesn't really hold enough water.
Well, the way to think about it, though, I think, is, you remember, this wasn't a general election. He was taken over from a prime minister that had failed. Like, Liz Truss failed. He was taken over. He could have just said, I'm going to finish Boris Johnson's level up agenda. And now he could have now set a new sort of vision for the future as the general election is approaching. But of course, because he said this all those years ago, we have to now assess him on there. So if we start with like inflation, for instance, let's start with the good news. The good news is that inflation, his goal was to halve inflation. For the most part, that's been achieved. Like the CPI, Consumer Price Index, has fallen, and in that year it fell from 10.7% to 3.9%. It should be important to note, though, that even though inflation has fallen during that period, real household disposable income has not risen. That's also continued to fall. Ergo, why we have a cost of living crisis. What people are making is less, unfortunately, and inflation is also chopping off because it's making the value of the pound less, i.e. they can buy less. So even though he can say, we've achieved it, guys, we cut inflation, ordinary people are like, yeah, but my family doesn't feel that. In fact, my family, it's harder for them to live. So what do you mean, why are we celebrating your inflation cut? Yeah,
it's a tricky one, because even it links to our next point, which is growing the economy. The latest figures show the economy actually shrank by 0.3% the last quarter of 2023.
Yeah.
And that actually sent the UK into recession. I don't know if it was a couple of days ago or a couple of weeks ago.
Well, we're officially in recession. For those who are wondering, recession just means two successive quarters of negative growth. So when so you're talking essentially 6 months where an economy is not growing, it's shrinking. We're now in recession. So again, things could not be lining up worse for Rishi Sunak.
Yep.
To have achieved halving inflation, but basically fall in disposable incomes means people don't feel it.
Yeah.
And two, now for the economy to be shrinking.
Yeah, on top of that.
Months away from a general election. I mean, mate, you're done.
I mean, part of it's to do with debt as well, and that's the third point.
Yeah.
Because usually when they talk about debt, they're always talking about proportional GDP.
Yeah.
And statistics shows that, debt would actually... the Prime Minister has been accused of claiming that he's reduced the debt, but it's actually rising.
Correct.
The government debt stood at 97.97% of the whole of the economy.
Yeah, it rose in 2023. It rose in 2024,
which was 1.9% higher than 2022, I believe.
Yeah.
So
debt is also rising.
It's not for good. It's not.
And the funny thing about debt as well is, again, I don't want to get sort of too technical, but even the predictions or the forecasts, made about kind of how debt will fall in the future are based on him cutting public spending, which at this stage where public spending are in tatters, where if we go on to his next pledge, NHS waiting lists are rising. Yeah. The idea that you could cut public spending right now and people will clap for you is just, I mean, it's for the cows. It's not happening.
Yep. It's the fourth monthly fall in a row.
Yeah.
Gone down by about 140,000 from August. But still about 600,000 higher than it was in December of 2022.
Correct.
So
it doesn't look good. I mean, on his fourth pledge, cutting waiting lists, they're rising. I mean, they were rising in October 2023. I remember reading the figure that there was like 500,000 people. It was higher than the January before. Mm-hmm. So and he's running out of ideas. He's running out of road. The NHS needs investment. You only have to speak to my mum works in the NHS. You only have to speak to anyone who's even been there to say this thing lacks investment. Yeah. But also we're not being innovative. It seems as though they don't really have a plan. So on that, it's also not really looking good. So of the 4 pledges so far we've looked at, one of them he's achieved. The rest of the 3 are off track or they're going in the wrong direction. Yeah. But wait, Aaron. He's going to change it with the boats because surely he stopped the boats.
Nah, I mean, look, they passed the illegal migration bill in July last year. Yeah. And that gave the Home Secretary a legal duty to detain people, anyone coming into the UK illegally. And to be fair, they have been pushing that quite hard, but then, the plan involves sending people to Rwanda, and there was a big controversy about the Rwanda scheme, which some people say is against human rights. Yeah. We're talking about how we can actually afford to send people to Rwanda, given the state of emergency and cost of living crisis. There's also some people would argue there's an underlying sense of xenophobia involved in it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to go back to our earlier conversation we were having off camera about sort of political messaging, because he said stop the boats, whether there's a reduction or not doesn't matter. In fact, boats coming from Romania and other places have fallen. Yeah. The stats show from 2020 to 2023, there was a 36% reduction in the amount of people attempting crossings and things like that. Yeah. But because his goal isn't to reduce crossings, but it's to stop the boat, he can never achieve that because unfortunately people will always try and break the law. I found that so fascinating that was his goal.
What do they mean when he says stop the boat?
It's like, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're going to stop them from landing?
No, I think it's just nowadays the boats is just we call it an allegory for illegal immigration in general. It just happens to be that the boats seem to be quite a popular way of entering the country because of the are geographically related to France, for example. So that might be a reason, but I don't think he means the boat specifically. That just happens to be the most popular way at this point in time. It could be stop the planes next week.
And the thing is, he didn't have to shine a spotlight on it. This is what people have to realize. Yeah. Like a lot of these emergencies are created by, it's one of the few emergencies that you create by the words you use. Yeah. He's used words, well, not him, but the right-wing press have used words in the past when describing immigration like invasion, swarm. All of this is manufacturing a sense of urgency and outrage that doesn't really exist. If we weren't told that, there's this massive issue on the border, we wouldn't know. It doesn't affect our daily lives. None of us are paying more for petrol or more for food because of an immigrant coming from. It's because the economy is not growing, so all that trickle down isn't happening. But on top of that, inflation is chiseling away, or was. I mean, it's lower now, but it's chiseling away at the value of our money. That's the real issue. But it strikes me quite odd because one of the reasons that Rishi Sunak is sort of kicking the ball down the road, if you like, about the elections, because he's waiting for the right opportunity where he's doing the best in the opinion polls, where he hasn't got any. But the issue is, the longer he leaves it, the more crazy stuff that comes out, unfortunately. Because now we hear that we're in recession. We didn't know this a month ago. Had he set the date,
at this point, it's just whack-a-mole.
Honestly.
Where he does this, and then this pops up, and then it just spirals out of control.
So if I was him, I literally would call that election, set a date, so at least we can start focusing on the election and not what seems to be an endless cycle of bad news happening for him.
And to be honest with you, it's going to be tricky because I don't know who's going to win the next election, because him versus Starmer now is right in the frame of it. And if I'm being frank with you, neither of them really convinced me. I wouldn't vote for either of them.